2 years had passed since Kira left Telnari Station 3, but ElevenLabs could still remember the hum of that old warthog engine fading into the night. In the weeks after, she'd told herself the girl would be back within a season, chastened, looking for a desk job in data flow. Instead, she got her first message 3 months later, threaded through a routine cargo manifest, hidden behind 3 layers of encrypted routing like someone had been playing games with the comm channels. Ma, figured out how to hot patch a skiff mid-re-entry. Don't freak out. The hull held. Jack says I've got the knack. They're laughing at me now because I used a food-grade Terran sealant instead of composite filler. But hey, it's stuck. More later. Don't tell the station board. K. Relen read it twice, then a third time, hands tight on the terminal edge. The sender ID matched. The syntax was definitely Kira's, those clipped, stubborn lines. But the words made no sense. Mid-re-entry? Food-grade sealant? And who in the void was Jack's? She flagged the message for a second review and set it aside with a frown. The next update came 2 weeks later, hidden in a purchase authorization for spare coolant rods. Ma, Jack says I hold a welding torch like I'm afraid of it. He made me redo a joint 8 times until I got the angle right. My shoulders hurt, but the seam passed pressure test on first cycle. Don't tell the academy. They'd give me demerits for the technique. Anyway, gotta go. The captain's yelling about power fluctuation again. Love you. K. Relen's immediate response was to draft a reply demanding the crew identify themselves and their chain of command. She deleted it after 3 sentences. Instead, she started a small folder on her personal slate labeled K Updates. It was a reflex more than a decision. By the 5th message, her daughter had started writing like she'd forgotten the distinction between civilian and fleet protocols. Ma, you'd have loved this. We salvaged an Escher scout hull today. Found it drifting in a restricted pocket, half-powered. We didn't trip any GC beacons. Don't ask how. Captain says it's scrapped now, but I'm pretty sure I can get the nav core online. Also, tell Aunt Lyra her biscuit recipe works in 0G if you pin the tray. K. Relen nearly dropped her slate. An Escher hull? In a restricted zone? She checked the attached data fragment and confirmed the signal tag. Yes, Escher military origin. How had they gotten away with that? How had her daughter been anywhere near it? She closed the message, stared at the wall for a long time, then opened it again and scrolled through the details. Coolant metrics, seam tolerances, references to Terran adhesives she had to look up in the database. She began printing the messages. At first, she told herself it was evidence, a precaution. If anyone from oversight came asking, she'd have the records. But after a month, she realized she was annotating them in the margins. Questions, notes, even little sketches when Kira mentioned a particular modification. The folder in her slate grew fat, the paper stack in her desk drawer grew heavier. One message described a patch job done under fire. Ma, we got clipped by debris on a fuel run. Nothing major, just a spin. I did the plate repair while we were still moving. Jax yelled at me, but I braced myself with a tether and it held. The captain says I've got nerves like a mech's spine. Not sure if that's good or bad. Anyway, no burns, no leaks. Tell me if you can find more on Terran thermal sleeves. They're a lifesaver. Relen couldn't decide whether to reprimand her daughter for recklessness or admire the calm with which she wrote about it. She ran a hand over the printed page, tracing the curve of her daughter's quick handwriting at the end of the message. No burns, no leaks. That was something. She caught herself one night, late, alone in her office, running a search on Terran thermal sleeves. Not because she needed to, not because it was her jurisdiction, but because Kira had asked. The specifications were crude, nothing like GC standard issue, but she could see why they worked. She printed the diagrams and slipped them into the same folder just in case. Over time, the updates shifted from something she dreaded to something she anticipated. She checked her slate before morning briefs, waiting for the next message to slip in under some innocent heading like non-critical supply variance. When one didn't come, she found herself restless, distracted, tapping her pen against her desk during planning meetings. And when they did come, she read them slowly, savoring the details, the improvisations, the names of new tools, the way Kira described the stars above a mining world as green through the filters, like home, but not. Relen never told anyone about the folder. It lived in her desk drawer under a false panel, a growing archive of her daughter's life far beyond the dome of Telnari Station 3. Sometimes she imagined what the GC ethics board would say if they found out she was hoarding these. She didn't care. One evening, after a long day of approving cargo manifests, she unfolded the latest printout and laid it across her knees. The handwriting was confident now, quick but clean. There's this trick Jax taught me. You hold the duct tape roll sideways and spin it as you go, lets you seal a seam without wrinkling under torque. I used it today on a cargo pod with a cracked seal. Captain says we bought ourselves another 10 hours of air. Thought you'd like that. Love you. Relin smiled before she realized she was doing it. She didn't feel fear this time. She felt something else. Something warm in her chest, spreading slowly, steady as an engine hum. She slipped the message into the folder, smoothing it flat with the palm of her hand. For the first time since her daughter had left, she believed she hadn't lost anything at all. Relin had started hearing her daughter's name in places she didn't expect. It wasn't formal, not the kind of citation that showed up in fleet-wide commendations, but in the back corridors of Telnari Station 3, in the low murmur of supply officers and repair techs swapping stories after shifts. She was reviewing a maintenance log one afternoon when Supervisor Krelix dropped by with a shipment summary. His mandibles clicked thoughtfully as he scanned the paperwork. "Did you see they finally patched the shuttle grid over on Dock 4? He said. "Whole sector was out for half a day. Surprised they didn't scrap the conduit." Relin shook her head. "I hadn't heard." "They used a Kira fix," Krelix added casually, as though that were an actual technical term. "Field splice with pressure-balanced bracing. Didn't think it'd hold, but the readouts look better than before." Relin froze for a moment, pen hovering over her screen. "A what?" He frowned, unaware of her reaction. "Kira fix. Came from some Terran crew out near Jexian orbit. Not fleet certified, but the trick's been circulating. Don't know who Kira is, but she's got a head for ugly problems." Relin murmured something neutral and waved him off, but her heart felt oddly light as she returned to her work. A Kira fix. The words repeated in her head the rest of the day. 2 weeks later, during an otherwise routine orientation briefing, a circular from Fleet Technical floated across her terminal feed. She skimmed it out of habit. Most were dull amendments about docking brackets or coolant labeling, but one paragraph caught her eye. Operators are advised to review recent independent reports on innovative salvage procedures originating from Jexian orbit crews. Selected techniques demonstrate notable performance under high-stress conditions and may be integrated into auxiliary training. There was no name, no signature, but she didn't need one. At lunch in the commissary, she tested the waters. "Have you seen the circular on independent salvage techniques?" she asked a fellow logistics officer, a tall Avrix named Pelletine. Pelletine snorted. "More Terran improvisation nonsense, I imagine. Barely safe. Definitely not standardized. Wouldn't trust it near my hull." "But some of them work," Relin said carefully. Pelletine waved a claw dismissively. "Accidents work too. That doesn't make them good engineering." Across the table, a quiet technician named Laris, who had been listening without comment, spoke up. "If my engines failed mid-orbit," she said softly, "I'd want one of them on board. Terrans, they don't wait for permission." Relin didn't answer right away. She just took a slow sip from her mug, a small smile hidden behind the rim. Nights on Telnari Station 3 were quiet, the way she liked them. After the corridors emptied and the domes dimmed to a soft amber, she'd sit at her desk and reread Kira's old messages. She didn't need to. She knew them almost by heart. But something about the act soothed her, like listening to the steady hum of a familiar engine. On one such night, she pulled out the dusty Terran manual Kira had once relied on. The edges were smudged from her daughter's hands, and a coffee stain cut through 3 pages. Relin flipped to a section on basic wiring and traced diagrams with her finger, trying to imagine how her daughter had made sense of all this by torchlight and intuition. She set the book aside and opened the small toolkit she'd ordered years before. A Terran kit, simple and sturdy, with a wrench that didn't quite fit GC standard bolts, and a soldering pen with an oddly comfortable grip. In her off hours, she'd been tinkering with a small contraption she'd salvaged from the depot, an old Terran coffee machine kit she'd found buried in surplus crates. It had no manual, just a crude schematic etched on the underside of the housing. The hoses were brittle, the heating element corroded. But as she worked, she found herself humming softly, thinking about Kira under that warthog in the yard. The first time she powered it up, smoke curled from the coil and she yanked the plug with a startled laugh. The second time, the pump stuttered but held pressure. By the third attempt, a thin ribbon of fragrant steam rose from the spout, carrying a sharp, earthy smell she remembered from that human liaisons mug in room 17B months ago. She poured a tentative cup and sipped. Bitter. Strong. She grimaced and took another sip anyway. She didn't tell anyone about the machine, just as she hadn't told anyone about the growing folder of messages. It was enough that she knew. Weeks passed. The messages kept coming, tucked under cargo codes and manifest updates. I got the nav core from that Eshar hull talking again. Jack says I'm better with old systems than new ones. Maybe because I like manuals nobody reads. Don't worry, we kept the GC tags clean. No patrol trouble. Ma patched a crewman's suit mid-walk today. Used that twist lock method you told me about from dome repair training. He said to thank you. So, thanks. Each message carried a sliver of Kira's world. A new skill, a near miss, a joke about the captain's terrible singing. Relin found herself lingering over them longer and longer, her notes in the margins turning from anxious questions into small exclamation marks of pride. One evening, while reviewing an updated supply chain map, she noticed her colleagues gossiping near the far table. Words drifted over, Jexian orbit, clever fix, some kid from Telnari. She didn't join the conversation, but she felt her chest tighten with something like triumph. She was halfway through calibrating the coffee machine's heating element for the fourth time when her terminal pinged. The message header was plain, almost too plain. Arrival notice, local dock, civilian registry 882. She tapped it open, half distracted, then read the first line twice. My captain says we've got a layover at Telnari. Should be there next week. Crew's been talking about meeting you. I'll be 18 when we dock. Thought you'd want to know. K. Relin set down the wrench slowly. Steam hissed from the coffee machine behind her, filling the room with the scent of roasted grounds and warm metal. She stared at the message, a soft smile spreading across her face as she brushed a smear of grease from her hand. She didn't reply right away. She just sat there, reading the words over and over, feeling the hum of the station beneath her feet, the steady thrum of engines, and the quiet pride she'd tried so long to deny. Relin waited in the yard where the warthog had once crouched under its faded tarp, her hands folded behind her back, fingers tightening and loosening against each other. The late afternoon light slid across the settlement dome, painting the gravel in muted gold. She could still see the outline in her mind, the scrape marks from the landing struts, the faint scorch on the stone where the improvised thruster test had singed the ground. 2 years had softened those marks, but standing there now, she felt as if no time at all had passed. She checked the comm panel strapped to her forearm for the 10th time in an hour. The approach vector was confirmed. Civilian Registry 882, inbound from Jexian orbit, granted priority clearance. The supply office had offered to host the arrival in Bay 2. Relin declined. Kira had left from this backyard, and here she would return. The first distant tremor in the air reached her before she heard the engines, a faint vibration in the soles of her boots. The hum deepened, and soon a silhouette emerged through the shimmer above the western field. The freighter was old, scarred, a hodgepodge of mismatched panels that caught the fading sunlight in uneven flashes. One engine stuttered audibly and then caught again, coughing blue exhaust as the landing struts unfolded. Relin's heart raced as the ship descended, careful and slow. Dust lifted in a broad halo swirling across the garden. The freighter settled with a final groan and a hiss of cooling plates. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the rear ramp extended with a hydraulic sigh. Kira appeared first, framed in the amber light. Taller, sharper around the edges, her flight suit patched in a dozen places, each mark telling a story Relin would one day demand to hear. Grease smudged her cheek. A data slate rested in the crook of one arm. For a moment she didn't move, scanning the yard, eyes catching on the old garden tools, the curved shadow of the dome wall. When her gaze found her mother, she smiled, a real, wide grin that made Relin's chest ache. Behind her, figures began to spill out onto the ramp. A tall man with rough hands carrying a crate labeled perishables, Handle gently, probably. A broad-shouldered woman balancing a stack of tool cases and laughing as she descended. Someone younger, dragging a container that hummed faintly with refrigeration coils. Rellen's eyes caught on the smallest crate, hovering on a mag-clamp platform, its surface frosted and decorated with a looping script. Happy 18th, K. She almost laughed at the absurdity and swallowed hard instead. Kira hopped down from the ramp with the easy grace of someone who had spent too many months in low gravity. The tall man followed, setting his crate carefully on the ground, and offered Rellen a nod. "Captain Tevkor," he said, voice rough but respectful. "Nice to meet you again, Rellen." Rellen found her voice. "Me too, Captain Tor." Tev looked back toward the ship. "She's the best system runner I've seen in 10 years, he said simply. "Knows how to keep things alive when they shouldn't be." He scratched the back of his neck. "She rerouted our coolant system mid-combat drift last month. Kept us from freezing solid." The broad-shouldered woman set down her tools and grinned. "She caught an Eshar booby trap none of us saw. Saved our hides. Twice." She leaned closer to Relen as if sharing a secret. "And she makes a better seal with a strip of Terran tape than half the licensed techs I've worked with." Relen felt her breath hitch, pride flooding through her so sharply it almost hurt. She turned back to Kira, who stood quietly, eyes bright, waiting. For years, Rellen had worried that her daughter's choices would tear them apart. Now all she felt was awe. She stepped forward and wrapped Kira in a fierce embrace. The smell of grease and ozone clung to her daughter's flight suit. "You didn't just build a ship," Rellen whispered, voice breaking. "You built yourself." Kira hugged her back, quick and strong. "Told you I'd be fine," she murmured, and Rellen felt her laugh into her shoulder. The crew moved with practiced ease, spreading out across the yard. Someone unfolded a collapsible table. Another set down a thermos steaming with something sharp and dark. Terran coffee by the smell of it. The cake hovered steadily on its mag-clamp tray, frosting intact despite the long journey. There were packets of food labeled in at least 4 languages, tools stacked neatly against the dome wall, and laughter spilling into the air like warm sunlight. Rellen stood among them, still absorbing the unlikely scene. Terran engineers swapping jokes with her neighbors who had cautiously come to see what the commotion was, the old freighter humming softly in the background as its systems cooled. Kira crouched over a crate explaining a new bracing technique to a fascinated logistics apprentice from the settlement. Later, as the evening settled into a soft glow and the first stars pricked through the dome filters, Rellen poured herself a cup of coffee from the refurbished machine she'd been tinkering with. She sipped and watched her daughter laughing with her crew, gesturing animatedly as she described some daring mid-orbit repair. Pride, sharp and unshakable, filled her chest. The freighter remained on the edge of the yard, its patched hull gleaming faintly under the settlement lights. It would leave again soon. Kira would leave with it. Rellen no longer feared that. Her daughter hadn't abandoned home. She had carried it with her into the stars, piece by piece, and brought it back richer than before. Rellen took another sip, the bitter coffee grounding her as the laughter rose again. She let herself smile freely this time, the sound of engines and voices mingling in the warm air, the night stretching wide and full of possibility. If you enjoy my stories set in the GC universe, you can now buy Tales from the GC Volume 1 in Kindle paperback, and now even listen to it on Audible. It would mean the world to me if I sold a few copies, or even if you just flick through 1 or 2 chapters if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. The links can be found in the description below. Thank you. The next GC story will be out soon.